Vision is made possible by light. When we see a pizza or a feather or a hammer, we're actually seeing light bounce off that object and into our eye. And just like we have the analogy of the mind like a computer, we also have the analogy of an eye like a camera. In fact, the way that cameras work is actually very similar to how our eyes work. Light enters our eyes through the pupils, tiny openings behind the corneas. The pupil regulates the amount of light entering the eye by either contracting, getting smaller in bright light, and dilating or getting larger in dimmer light. Once past the pupil, light passes through the lens, which focuses an image on a thin layer of cells in the back of the eye called the retina. It is in the retina that light is transduced or converted into electrical signals by specialized cells called photoreceptors. The retina contains two main kinds of photoreceptors, rods and cones. Rods are primarily responsible for ability we have to see in dim light conditions such as at night. Cones, on the other hand, provide us with the ability to see color and fine detail when light is brighter, such as during the day. We'll talk more about how we see lightness and darkness in a minute. But just to continue for a minute on the basic anatomy here, those electrical signals from the retina travel down through the optic nerve that starts in the back of our eyes to the thalamus, then to the primary visual cortex, which is in the back of our brains. This is within the occipital lobe. This is where information about light orientation and movement begin to come together, and we begin to make sense of the visual information that we have taken in. Information is then sent to a variety of different areas in the cortex for more complex processing. This also demonstrates how the entire brain operates holistically rather than with discrete modules. In other words, the entire process of visual perception happens in the whole brain, while the visual cortex plays a larger role in distributing and directing information throughout the other parts of the brain. In fact, as information leaves the occipital lobe, it travels down two main pathways or streams. One is the ventral stream, also known as the what pathway, shown in purple on the diagram. And that leads to the temporal lobe, which is involved in object and visual identification and recognition. The other stream, called the dorsal stream, or the where pathway, is shown in green. And this leads to the parietal lobe, which is involved in processing the object's spatial location relative to the viewer and with speech repetition. Now, back to light and dark conditions. Humans have the ability to adapt to changes in light conditions. Consider the experience of seeing a movie during the daylight hours. It takes a bit of time to adjust, right? And there's a different adjustment if you have a blackout late at night and all of the lights go out. Night vision takes about 10 minutes to turn on, a process called dark adaptation, and can actually take up to 30 minutes to fully adapt. This is because our rods become bleached in normal light conditions and require time to recover. When we do light adaptation, your eyes might actually hurt if light comes on too abruptly because the muscles around your pupil will contract, making it smaller so as to avoid being blinded by brightness. In this scenario, you are also switching from rods to cones, and it takes time to turn off a great number of rods and activate the cones. Trichromatic theory states that our cones have a preference for three kinds of colors: red, green, and blue. Opponent process theory states that our cones, or rather the retinal ganglion cells that receive the information from our cones, respond to pairs of colors: red, green, blue, yellow, black, white. So here's a demonstration of how this works. If you look at the center of the image, the plus sign in the middle of the rectangle for 30 seconds, and I'm going to keep time, then you'll see the opponent process theory take effect on the next slide. So now on this slide, you should see the after image from the previous slide. You will likely see a green rectangle with a yellow plus in the center. One final point about vision. The fact that we have two eyes means that they can present our brain with two slightly different images, a phenomenon called binocular disparity. You can test this yourself by holding a pen in your hand in front of your face and look at it with each eye individually. So close one eye while keeping the other one open and then switch. Pay attention to the apparent position of the pen relative to the objects in the background. Depending on which eye is open, the pen appears to jump back and forth. This demonstrates binocular disparity. This is also how we're able to create the visual perception of 3D movies and how video game manufacturers create the perception of 3D worlds, even if we're looking at a two-dimensional screen. Although I gotta say, my favorite video games are still the original 2D games from 30 years ago. Sometimes simpler is better.